This is Michael Stone. He's going to talk. He's done some exciting work in Chattanooga, Tennessee, which you'll hear about. But I love working with Michael. He is so passionate, and he's an authentic communicator with students. In fact, he grew up in the classroom as a teacher, and then has moved quite significantly beyond that. But his centering place is what's happening with the students and what the students learning. So I'm really excited to introduce you all to Michael Stone. Michael Stone, you can take it away. I'm going to stop sharing.
Thanks, and please do keep the chat going, but I'm closing the chat on my screen because I would just read it the rest of the morning. That's really exciting and inspiring to see. I'm going to open up with a quick little 2-minute video to give you a little glimpse of what's been happening in Chattanooga, as Liz said, and then I'll jump into the presentation here this morning. So bear with me. I think I got all the share screen stuff working right. I'll watch for head nods if the sound's working or not here. Hopefully you can see the screen and sound.
Digital fabrication labs are really revolutionary maker spaces.
The place where you can come and really make anything.
They are places where students can solve problems.
It's a space for learning. It's a space for failure.
You can have an idea and make it real.
If you want to read a book, you'll go to the library, but if you want to be on a computer and create stuff and make stuff that you could never think is possible, you would go to the E-Lab.
It's basically all about creating new ideas.
The door is just completely open to these kids as far as what they can do and what they can create.
Having this in the high school setting with great teachers to explain everything, how to use it, it's just so amazing.
It's just great, because I know there are so many people who don't have that opportunity. And because I do, I'm blessed, I'm blessed that I took an interest in it, and I'm blessed that it was here so that I could figure out what I might want to do later in life.
I have the opportunity to do things for kids and help them figure out their place in the world. And they may not have figured that out before. We just want to set them up.
We want students, our graduates, to go into the community and make a difference as adults. And we really are giving them those skills in digital fabrication labs. My hope is that there's not a single student in Hamilton County that doesn't have access to a lab. So that's what I see down the line. I also see that we don't even know what's possible yet because the kids are dreamers, and these digital fabrication labs are where those dreams become reality, and I can't wait to see where they tell us we can go next.
Okay, thanks for bearing with me through that. Hopefully that gives you a little bit of glimpse into what's been going on in Hamilton County. I don't want to give you a history lesson, so I'm going to avoid some of that this morning, but I did want to lead there to just give you a little bit of insight. There's a line that was buried right in the middle. There's a young lady who was interviewed, and off the top of her head, she said, I was blessed that the lab was here, and I might be able to figure out what I want to do later in life because of my experiences in the lab. It's a powerful idea. So I want to start by sharing about a decade ago, I was first exposed to a phrase that I'm sure many of you have heard. It captured my attention the moment I heard it. Heard a principal say, students shouldn't be consuming, they should be creating. I was at a stage in my career as a teacher where I was just starting to embrace the idea that the role of teachers was, or at least should be, fundamentally shifting. This phrase hit me just right upside the head because I wasn't quite ready to understand what the principal meant. Now, before I go further, I'd love to make this as interactive as we can. So I want to ask you, from your perspective, feel free to use the chat here and respond, and feel free to chat throughout. I deeply believe in the value of community on this kind of stuff.
Wait, Michael, let me interrupt. I can't see your screen share.
Oh, sorry, it should just be a white screen. There we go. Is that
Okay, okay, all right, just making sure. Yep,
okay? Great.
I can see a white screen.
Okay, it's a white screen right now. So here's the question I have for you. From your perspective, what does it mean to be a creator? And is this something we should expect from students, or is it even something we should support? So think about a little bit here. What does it mean to be a creator, perhaps instead of a consumer? Should we expect students to be creators? And is that something we should even support in education? Now, as I mentioned, I don't want to get off track, so I'm not going to look at the chat at all. I've got it closed on my screen and intentionally pushed it to a different monitor, so I won't look at it, but I'll come back. We'll have time for Q&A and some conversation at the end of the presentation this morning, so I'll make sure we come back there. But for now, you're going to see me kind of ignoring you. So if you're asking questions and they're engaging throughout, I'm just going to not pay attention until the end, so that don't get too sidetracked and distracted. Now, before I go further down the creator and consumer road, we're going to certainly circle back to that. I want to acknowledge that much of the work I'm going to talk about today wouldn't be possible without a lot of people. Locally, our teachers, you're going to be able to hear from some of them in breakout sessions today, have done an incredible job. Our principals, our local school district, and others have just done some really compelling work. We also have built on the work of Titans around the world, and I'd be remiss. So now the slides will move along again. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the work that Dr. Neil Gershenfeld and Sherry Lassiter with MIT and the Fab Foundation have done, both developing and codifying and growing an international network of Fab Labs. We literally couldn't be doing what we're doing in our community without the work that they have done and continue to do. We recently had an opportunity to bring a group of educators up to MIT to visit their Center for Bits and Atoms. And there we saw graduate students who were sharing just incredible work. They're developing some amazing new technologies. They showed things like voxels, and they were doing protein folding and a ton of other interesting things that are well beyond my capacity to really understand. All that to say, really excited about the future of digital fabrication and the growing collective of makers around the globe. Even just watching all of you sign in here this morning, it's just exciting. It's exciting to be a part of a global community of a STEM network that's doing this kind of work and that's doing this kind of work with kids. It's really focused on bringing this to students. In our community, we're based in Southeast Tennessee in the United States. In 2014, we had a principal who had a crazy idea. He was watching his high school students deliver high quality presentations at the end of project-based learning units. But with an undergraduate degree in engineering, he recognized that his students' presentations only included slick slideshows and, at best, rudimentary models of potential solutions as products. There was a lot of like duct tape and cardboard, which is a great starting point. But he knew that his kids were never getting to take an idea from their head, bring it to reality, and then test it to see if it actually solved the problem the way they hoped it would. He wanted them to get to iterate and to experience the kind of deep learning that happens when you work through an iterative process. Well, he and his team worked with folks at the Tennessee STEM Innovation Network, with Battelle, and were connected to a handful of schools in the US that had started using Fab Labs. Now, they were unfamiliar with the idea, but they went and visited. And in fact, the first visit they made was to MC Squared in Cleveland, Ohio, Cleveland, Ohio, and to see what this work could look like. As they got their head around what Fab Labs were, in essence, they started developing a unique learning model to leverage these advanced maker spaces to radically transform student development. Now, in short, they had a pretty simple epiphany. With access to the kinds of computer-controlled tools and equipment in a Fab Lab, access to a global network of technical experts, and access to teachers who facilitate deep learning rather than disseminating content, they thought that students could actually create perhaps more than they consume. They had this idea that students could learn through the creation process. Now, obviously, this isn't the first time that anybody's thought about this, but they started building a model of a school. They essentially redesigned the entire school around the kinds of experiences that students could have and the kinds of experiences that could be accelerated through a Fab Lab. Well, Over the next few years, we were blessed in our community to partner with Volkswagen and other community groups to develop what is now the largest collection of school-based fab labs in the world. The headline in the local newspaper was perhaps a bit aspirational, top of the world, but we do today have 36 labs in public schools serving students from kindergarten through 12th grade in our community. And we currently have plans and just secured funding to open 34 more labs. We've also helped lead the development of about 18 additional labs, fab labs in schools across the United States over the last few years. Now, in the labs, kids have made all kinds of cool things, and recognizing the audience, you all are familiar with what's possible in a fab lab. We've had students make things from like medically approved 3D printed and laser cut face shields for frontline workers during the PPE shortage at the beginning of the pandemic, to a riding pad that mitigates back pain for competition horses, to we even had a student a few years ago that made a racist door. The intent was to expose the implicit bias of artificial intelligence systems by locking bank doors to people who artificial intelligence systems identified as most likely to commit white collar crimes. The door locked white males. It locked me out of local banks. Pretty interesting project. I could probably spend hours, as I'm sure most of you could, just showing pictures of products that the kids have created in the labs. But those products are not really what we actually use the labs for. We consider those byproducts of the kinds of experiences that students are having, the learning experiences that students are having in the labs. I'm convinced the growth of the Fab Lab network in our community is due in large part to the unique learning model that our teachers and our leaders have developed over the past decade. At the core of the model is this idea that, as my friend Dr. Gary Steger says regularly, this idea that we should facilitate deep learning as a consequence of rich experience. Now, locally, we strive daily to create opportunities for students to engage in these kinds of rich experiences. The technology that the labs provide allows students to create potentially functional solutions to authentic, real problems. And when that happens, what we've observed is that students are empowered to have more agency over their learning as they strive to bring their unique solutions to life. This also allows the teachers to embrace a fundamental shift in instructional practice. And this is where we think the secret sauce of what we've been doing really lies. Rather than focusing on and even assessing the quality or functionality or beauty of a product, teachers are freed to facilitate students' ability to access, interpret, and apply information in a dynamic setting and within a very specific and unique context. So essentially, we're using the labs to help schools shift from a traditional model where content is king and everything else is lower on the priority list. In other words, the learning model that we've been using with the labs is shifting the question. Rather than making school about what you know, we're now able to focus on what you can learn and do. It's become apparent in the modern world, students and adults have more content in their pocket than anyone could possibly learn in 1,000 lifetimes. Today, agility, adaptability, and critical thinking are far more important than any single piece of content someone might know. And that's true regardless of industry or field that it's being applied in. Students have to learn how to learn, and they have to be able to apply that learning quickly within novel and rapidly changing contexts. Now, excuse me, Fab Labs and the learning model our teachers and our leaders have embraced, they're providing a compelling mechanism to prepare students for this dynamic reality. But as I mentioned at the beginning, certainly don't want to take credit for work we haven't done. We certainly didn't have this realization first, and we had not done the research to articulate all of this. We're building on the work of titans that have come before us. For example, Dr. Tony Wagner 20 years ago talked about this idea of what he started calling the 7 survival skills for the 21st century. Now, unfortunately, despite champions like Dr. Wagner or Sir Ken Robinson and countless others, the first 20 years of the 21st century have seen a lot of school systems, especially in the United States, double down on content and all but abandon these kind of essential skills. Now, we all tend to recognize these skills matter. No one suggests that communication or critical thinking or creativity shouldn't be taught. When we take an honest evaluation of what we actually do in school, what we teach, what we assess, what we grade, most of the time, these kinds of skills are pushed to the side in favor of just driving harder and harder at content. In a race to the top to prepare students to compete globally in math and science proficiency, we slowly drifted away from any experiences in formal education that empower students to cultivate, evaluate, and eventually master these kinds of skills. As we've launched and grown the VW eLab project locally with Volkswagen and other partners, we've been intensely focused on prioritizing student development of these exact skills. From a high level view, the model that has evolved leverages the personalized fabrication capabilities of Fab Labs to empower students with the ability to learn new technical skills that are applied across a wide range of contexts, while simultaneously explicitly focusing on these kinds of survival skills. In other words, we're empowering students to learn and use new technology effectively. We're doing that not as the driver, but as a side effect, as an incidental experience as they cultivate these key essential skills. We've tried to articulate this model as best we can with a graphic. It wouldn't be a good presentation without a fun infographic. Thanks to our friends in Denmark for some of the work on this. We've really worked closely with them and modeled a lot after what they're doing. The cycle we look at begins here with sort of the green circle. It starts with authentic experiences. We know students need to be challenged to solve real problems, not like trivial versions of real world problems, actual real problems. And while they're challenged with that, what we do is we provide them with a clear rubric that articulates what and how their solution development process will be evaluated. Now, no, I didn't say how their product will be evaluated. It's absolutely essential in our purview that we want to encourage risky and innovative solutions. We suffocate students' willingness to take risk if we grade the effectiveness of their products. If we want them to be innovative and try new things, we can't penalize them when the product doesn't work. Rather, what we've realized is that with the tools in a Fab Lab, students feel empowered and they're intrinsically motivated to take an idea from their head and bring it to reality. And they have the possibility to actually do that with the kinds of equipment that a Fab Lab provides access to. As a result, the teachers don't have to use any kind of external motivation, whether an incentive or potentially punitive grade, as a way to motivate students to do this kind of work. Instead, our teachers get to assess and provide key feedback about the process. In doing so, we equip students to grow their ability to tackle a wide range of problems and to develop the confidence and self-efficacy that it's okay to fail. It's just not okay to quit. That we try new things, and when they don't work, we learn from why they don't work, and it informs our next attempt. We want to lean hard in that process, and we've tried to embrace that both in how we teach, but also how we grade things. Well, I'll go more quickly through the rest of the model here. We've always had this focus on essential skills and seeing students creating functional solutions to authentic experiences. We have the opportunity to really make learning tangible. We give them an opportunity to take their thinking and make it visible. As the work grew and thousands of students, now tens of thousands of students, began using the labs in the schools in our community, we discovered that they incidentally also developed technical fluency. So as they engage in bringing ideas to life, they start to realize the tools around them have the power to help them do that. It also turns out students quickly learn things when they have an actual reason to, and they don't often need their teacher to be the access point for the content they want to learn. They don't need, and refreshingly, they don't even expect their teacher to know everything, but they desperately need teachers to model how to learn almost anything. I'll circle back to that idea later. The final sort of element in the cycle is what happens as a result of these student experiences in the lab. As students dive into deeper learning through these rich experiences, they begin to develop a sense of identity as a creator. The authenticity of the experiences helps facilitate an inclusive culture and empower students, especially many of those who've been historically marginalized, to develop a sense of belonging before adverse stereotypes and other systemic barriers set in. Essentially, what happens is students, when they are empowered to solve problems they care about, and they're given access to tools, people, and content to make their ideas a reality, they start to discover what they're good at and what they like. This intersection of my interest and my aptitude provides compelling motivation to develop the kind of self-confidence needed to thrive in a field where I may not see role models that look like me, or I may not have role models that have done this before that have shared similar life experiences. But I'm empowered to pursue that because I've discovered this sense of identity. This is a thing I enjoy doing. It's a thing I'm good at. I want to do more of that. We're excited about what those implications are in our community and about spreading that impact across the country and around the world. Now, the other piece that happens is we start to see these integrated experiences start to occur organically. The kind of work the students engage in the labs as they solve real problems and embed their learning in that solution development process, it begins to break down the silos that we have traditionally sort of baked into academic development. Rather than perceiving content as disconnected elements where I go to math and then English and then history, students begin to explore the intersectionality of those content pieces. They start to explore how math and language work together, the implications of integrating science and history or art and engineering. Essentially, they begin to see purpose in their learning. And that's where we come full circle. Excuse me. While I appreciated the phrase I asked about at the beginning, that students should make more than they consume, for a while I championed it, but now I actually no longer believe it. As Dr. Gershenfeld famously developed his How to Make Almost Anything course in the original Fab Lab at MIT, he was also modeling the framework for how we learn almost anything. I'm convinced that the best consuming occurs during the making. The two cannot, or at least should not, be separated. How do we get kids to create more than they consume? I'm not sure we should. I think the question should be just how do we get kids to create? Can we embed consumption in the making and make the making as real as possible, as early and as often as possible? We shouldn't be berating our kids for consuming content. We should teach them to consume content for purpose. Now, in the video I opened with at the beginning of the presentation today, there were two young women who you saw. They were young students when we made the video a couple of years ago. This is Jamie and Taylor. They were two students at one of our local high schools. They were students who were freshmen when their school got a VWE lab, a Fab Lab. They had a Fab Lab for their entire high school experience. Now, when their school got their Fab Lab, they would already have been identified. Teachers would have said, oh yeah, these are great kids, good students, they do well in school. But when you listen to them talk in the interview, and if you had the opportunity to spend time with them in high school, you would know that they were two students who were good at high school, good at school, but only in certain ways, only the ways we sort of typically mean it. What you could hear hopefully in their interview was as they were talking about their experience in the Fab Lab, they started saying things like, I started to discover what I really liked. I think I'm going to figure out my place in the world. By their senior year, Jamie and Taylor had had their educational experience so transformed that they began looking to say, hey, kids from the elementary schools and the middle schools in our neighborhood, they don't have this. How can we bring this kind of experience? And they weren't talking just about the technology. That was a piece, but they were leveraging the technology and equipment in the labs as a catalyst to really change how they were developing, how they were preparing for their future. They began projects to meet with community leaders to bring those labs to other schools, to start to look at how could we support even bringing this all the way down to elementary school. At the time, we only had these labs available in middle schools and high schools. Well, I'm excited to share, they also discovered some things about their future. Both of them enrolled at the University of Tennessee at Knoxville, the UTK. And last year, in their sophomore year, both of them were accepted into the engineering program. They weren't just prepared to be successful in the engineering program, they certainly were, but not just prepared for success in the program. They were empowered to develop the sense of identity, to develop the sense of confidence and self-efficacy, to see themselves in a field where they're currently underrepresented. They were able to overcome a number of the kinds of barriers that have been well documented regarding equity and inclusion, and start to carve out a path for themselves that uniquely aligns with their particular interests and their skills. As a dad to four, I have 4 daughters aged 3 to 13. I'm increasingly convinced we have to abandon the archaic idea of linear development. This idea that we have to spend the first 2 decades of our lives developing increasingly niche expertise before we can create and add any kind of value to the world. We should instead adopt a paradigm shift that realizes that from a very young age, students can create real things, meaningful things, things that add value. They can leverage their childlike creativity before we squash it out of them, and the fearlessness that comes with naivety to quickly learn and apply new ideas to real problems. Now, the solutions they make have the potential to amaze us and change our world. And that's really exciting. But more importantly, the power of consistent, authentic experiences enables students to radically transform how they are prepared to navigate the dynamic world ahead. I'm so excited to get to participate in this conference today, to engage with each of you in the breakout sessions and to sit in on the unconferences. Nothing is more powerful than a community. The last thing I'll share is just, I know we have a few folks from Chattanooga who operate, the teachers that operate and run these labs. I encourage you to talk with them. This work isn't about one person or a small group of executives sitting in a boardroom making decisions. I'm confident this work has grown because actual teachers built things for real kids, and they built them in a way that was meaningful. It was organic, it's grown from the ground up, and it was built on top of the kinds of work that's been done globally through initiatives like the work of the Fab Foundation and so many others that are represented in this work, in this event today. I do want to share before we get into the Q&A, my contact information is showing on the slide here. I wrote a book with the founding principal of the STEM school and Josh Snyderman a few years ago. It's a very short, very small book. Please don't go to Amazon and purchase it. It is there, but it's not our intent. We give it away for free at the website there, the electronic version. If you're interested, it gets into some of the more nuances and philosophies that we try to apply in the labs. You're welcome to have a copy and share the link freely. And then, as Liz said, we have a conference that we offer for educators at a very low price. I think it's $50 registration for the 3 days, and that includes breakfast and lunch each day and all the materials. It's a hands-on conference. We basically ban PowerPoint, so you don't do what we've done the last 20 minutes and listen to one person talk at you. We spend the whole time instead engaged in Fab Labs with real teachers doing things. I would say it's a conference or an institute for teachers by teachers. You actually get to build things and do some things. So if you're interested, the link is there on the screen, and you're more than welcome to check that out. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions. I'll stop sharing my screen now. And Liz, hopefully you've had a chance to maybe curate the chat. I just see a big number in front of me.
Yes, people have been cheering you on and agreeing with a lot of the stuff you're saying. I haven't seen any straight up questions come through, but I have some questions for you.
Sure.
Actually, Melvin has a question, and then I'll jump in. Can you speak to the tension between traditional scope and sequence learning standards and PD with the Fab Lab implementation?
Yeah, that's a great question. I had a superintendent ask that yesterday. So we definitely wrestle with that, and I appreciate the phrasing. Like the tension between the two is exactly right. in a keynote, you're trying to make it compelling, but in reality, what actually happens. So we talk about not letting content be king, where what we mean by that is like right now, I'll give a specific example. If you walk into most high schools and ask the question, what would my student learn in your school? And you specifically ask, like, how will my student get better at math? Not just the principal or the math teachers, but probably every person in the building, students and parents included, could quickly explain, like, here's exactly the pathway to get better at math. Here's algebra 1 and geometry and algebra 2 and pre-cal, and that vertical path is pretty clear. When we ask the same question, but we say, like, if we plugged in collaboration instead, how do my kids get better at collaboration in your school? At best, most schools, after some crickets chirp, will say something like, we do group projects. But no one in the building thinks collaboration doesn't matter, right? They all believe students should be learning to collaborate, but we've not explicitly baked it in. So when we say don't make content king, right now, content is king in the sense that, like, it's number 1 on the priority list, and we go down to like slot 50 before we see anything else. What we're trying to say is, we don't need to say content doesn't matter. My training, I was a math teacher for 10 years. My daughters, I absolutely think they need to learn how to factor. I'm glad they're learning how to read and do arithmetic, right? The math and science and the history and civics and discourse, all the things they're learning from a content standpoint, I absolutely fundamentally believe matter. We're not saying they should be taken off the list. We're saying they shouldn't be 50 steps away from the next thing. But what would it look like when we elevate those process skills or essential skills to the same footing? So to address the tension directly, the model used in most of our labs, we use project-based learning as sort of the instructional modality. And as any good PBL unit would do, the very first thing you're doing in project-based learning is identifying the content standards or clusters of content that you're aligning the project against. So while students may be making a pad to mitigate back pain for horses, they're doing that through the context of specific content standards that are aligned. So it really is embedding and integrating this kind of essential skill development alongside content mastery, not in place of content mastery.
So Michael, can you talk a little bit about how your school district is able to benchmark those 21st century skills, especially with your new app?
Sure. Yes. I tell you what, let me reshare my slide deck. I thought you might ask that, so I've got a slide for it. I just buried it at the end. Let's see here. 1 second. It's probably easier to see with a visual.
We actually can't see the slide. Oh, there it is. My bad.
There you go. So we did. We've been in the process of building out an app, a mobile application, a web-based application that allows students to create student portfolios so they can capture and collect their work, but it also empowers students to have a really clear sense of the trajectory. So like what the articulation is, both of those essential skills and the kinds of technical skills we started to realize they're developing. So this is the technical skill tree. This is actually about 1/3 of the micro credentials, the skills from a technical standpoint that students are developing. I know it's not legible at this size, but wanted to give you a sense of the scope. We started building this around the sort of pillars of Fab Labs of digital fabrication. If you zoom in on these from a technical standpoint, it's the same idea for an essential skills standpoint, but we break down big skills into smaller bits. And this is an early sketch of these. These have since evolved. There's, I think, 25 or 30 of these now. They're sort of subdomains. But the idea is to give students a clear pathway that if I master certain skills along the way, each of these micro credentials has 8 to 10 look-fors with them, sort of what evidence a student has to show mastery of in order to earn the micro credential. We've mapped those against, in Tennessee, we call them EPSOs, these EPSO, it's an early post-secondary opportunity. Essentially, they're industry certifications. And so we've mapped these skills, the technical skills, against industry certifications, and we've mapped the essential skills against the STEM framework from the Global STEM Alliance out of New York City. Came out 2018, 2019, with the idea that we wanted students to have a really clear sense and an amount of agency over what kind of technical skills they developed as they solve problems, but also to continue to elevate the value of those essential skills. We've said it this way sort of casually that, like, we need students who can learn how to use a 3D printer. we also need students who can do that without being a jerk, right? Who can like collaborate effectively with others. So that I have technical proficiency sets me up for a kind of success, but without those essential skills, interpersonal skills, I limit my potential. And conversely, if all I have are essential skills and I have no hard skills, and no technical skills, no content knowledge, I equally limit my potential. Maybe a great guy, but I can't do anything. There's a problem there also, right? So we want to be able to have students have this sort of cohesive development as they work through projects.
Thank you for sharing. Can you, there's been some chatter in the chat about what, oh, actually, Kristen took a shot at this, kind of the difference between what's happening in your e-labs versus what happens in a traditional shop class.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'll build on what Kristen wrote because she went exactly where I would have gone. It's as if we've worked together for a decade. So a lot of times we have visitors come through a lot, as I'm sure you do in your labs. And when they see the Fab Labs, they'll oftentimes at first glance frame it as like 21st century shop class, right? It's shop class with computers. We tend to push back a little bit on that because of the learning model. Shop class and what we're trying to do with Fab Labs have two distinct goals. Not that one's necessarily better than the other, but they're driving at a different in sort of intended end. So in a shop class, the idea is oftentimes to teach craftsmanship and tool mastery. So you're trying to teach students how to master specific tools or how to develop specific craftsmanship skills. When that's the case, a model where a master fabricator, a master designer or builder builds out a perfect or an ideal example and then provides very clear instructions, and students use the tools to try to replicate that model, right? I build a birdhouse, you have to build my birdhouse. And as you do, I can recognize you know how to use these tools, or at least this specific kind of tool and these types of joinery and whatnot. That's a great model for teaching craftsmanship and specific kinds of tool mastery. We're really trying to say, when you happen to have access to digital fabrication tools, what are the implications on your development holistically? So rather than sitting down and teaching 3D design for 3D printing, or design for laser cutting or CNC milling or microelectronics and computing, instead of teaching those skills explicitly, we want students to engage in the engineering principle of just-in-time learning, where they learn and develop those skills as needed because they're trying to bring something to fruition that they currently don't have the skills or knowledge to do. So we're using the tools in service of that other process, as opposed to trying to teach those tool skills. In Fabfolio, what we realized is a number of kids are developing a lot of technical skills while they're doing that. So we wanted to give them a very clear sense of like, well, if you've done 30 projects and you're developing this skill set, you should consider going down that path. It seems like you like this. This is what more advanced 3D design would look like, or design for additive manufacturing or for physical computing. So the intention of those skill trees is really to empower students to make informed decisions as they continue to progress and grow their skill sets. I hope that addresses that question clear enough.
Yeah, I have a follow-up question to that. I see a lot of schools who are implementing digital fabrication in their schools, and they're kind of just doing that, replacing their tech ed programs or their shop class with these new machines and technologies. What are some strategies that you recognize that would help kind of shift the thought process, or shift how these tools are being used, rather than as a shop class, you know, shifting into what kind of model that you guys are doing? What are some, like for the normal school districts who are putting these in one at a time, you know, we don't have kind of the overarching support that you do in your district. Just some strategies and best practices would be helpful.
So, okay, so sort of first, a little bit of the being on the shop class. I want to be careful. So in a response to a question about shop class, I'm framing the two kind of against each other, but that's not really the intent. It's the idea here is not to pit the two. I think there were and certainly are still shop classes that are teaching problem solving through craftsmanship. That's powerful. That's wonderful. I think what we see with digital fabrication is we can accelerate that significantly. All right, so I'll use routing as an example. I would never put a router in my 10-year-old's hands. She doesn't have the dexterity and strength. No matter how good the jig was built for her, there's no way I'm letting her drive a router around a piece of lumber. It's just dangerous, right? It's not safe. But she can absolutely design in CAD and let a computer controlled router do the same thing. So she can achieve a level of precision that may otherwise have taken years to master from a sort of hard skill standpoint. That aside, I don't mean at all to sort of knock on shop class. In many ways, it was the only place for decades we had an opportunity to do any of this kind of work. I think what Fab Labs are doing is making this broadly available, and especially much more at a much younger age. In terms of integrating this into schools, this is going to sound like a dodgy answer, but I really think it's about evaluating your why. When we have schools approach us, at this point, we have a number of schools visit and look at the labs, and they're enamored many times with the technology. They'll ask us for a spreadsheet of like what to buy. And that's great. I mean, anybody with a check with a couple of commas in it can buy great stuff, right? What we've actually turned down opportunities to work with some school districts who just wanted us to help them buy stuff and sort of advise around the stuff to buy. We're much more interested in what they're going to do with the stuff, right? Like, what's their rationale? Why are you providing? So there's a lot of logistics stuff to really get in the weeds, and I'd be happy to connect and sort of address that offline. But at a high level, we need principals, like the principal of the building, and at least one or two teachers with a growth mindset. They don't need to be tech experts, but with the mindset of like, what I'm currently doing is only getting my kids so far. I wish I could take them further. Like, when they see that, that becomes the genesis for like, okay, we want to embrace a Fab Lab because of what it can do to transform how students use the kind of content we're teaching, as opposed to we'd like to print a whole lot of, baby Yodas or whatever.
There's a question in the chat from Danielle. Can you speak to the lingering belief by engineering education that more maker-centered learning based as much on arts and tinkering as scientific testing is not as rigorous, especially when it's hard to quantify iterative design cycles and process-based assessment? That's a tough one.
Ooh, yeah, that's a whole thing. That's a great question. I'm going to copy that. It's a good prompt for like writing later. So can I speak to that? Yeah, I'll speak to it from what I think your angle is, which is I think I completely agree with you. I think it is a lingering belief in engineering education, and I think it's part of the paradigm shift that we've just got to facilitate. I mean, it's exciting to see the number of people even attending this event as, excuse me, as like evidence that there's a groundswell of momentum saying, we've got to reevaluate how we assess our student development. This notion that the only way to assess kids is through fill in the bubble style tests and like specific types of content mastery is really archaic. It's a system designed by adults for adults, right? It best serves adults in power. It's pretty clear it doesn't best serve students. Right now, in most states domestically, it's the best available option that's been implemented. And we know that change is difficult and hard to do at a big level, like at a state level or federal level. But I think we're starting to see a groundswell. And honestly, I think this is where employers are starting to really be helpful. We've done a lot of surveying of employers locally and starting to grow that survey broader. And what we're hearing from employers is, like, Volkswagen as a great example. Volkswagen is not telling us, here's the 10 things if kids could do these hard skills, we would hire them. They're regularly saying, look, if kids could pass a drug test, show up on time, do their work without direct input from their supervisor, have some amount of independent work, be able to collaborate effectively, show some professionalism, we have to train them on proprietary systems anyways. We hear that from large auto manufacturers, from IT companies, from insurance companies. So I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I'm reading into a question a little bit, Danielle, but I think you're absolutely right. There is this belief that, like, there's a lack of rigor, and I think that's fundamentally flawed. Whoever you work for isn't my boss. I'd be happy to share directly with them.
I did mention that these talks would be recorded and on the YouTube channel, Danielle, for support. I have another question, Michael. If you could talk a little bit about how you prepare your teachers to teach with these tools.
Oh, that's great. So we have some of our teachers on the call today and throughout in the event today, so I'll definitely defer to them as well. But from a high level perspective, we provide about 150 hours of professional development across a 3-year runway. It's pretty intense on the front end, and then monthly check-ins along the way, sort of monthly sessions throughout the 3 years. The first year is focused heavily on pedagogy and instruction. So what are the implications on instructional strategies when we have access to these kinds of tools? How does this transform what we do with kids, not what we're teaching them, but sort of how we interact with them and prepare them. The other thing we do with the students or with the teachers in that first year training is the only technical training we really do on the tools is around safety. We want to make sure teachers can use them safely. We've got some safety quizzes that the teachers have developed. We did a lot of alignment with like OSHA and built on existing resources that were already out there in the ether on safety pieces. But we intentionally don't focus on making our teachers technical experts before they're in the labs, because we want them modeling how to learn. We actively look for teachers who are great learners, not who are necessarily great technicians. And we challenge them to learn in front of their kids and to model that on a daily basis. It's worked for us. It was a bit of a gamble when we started. We weren't sure that would work, but that's been our approach.
Great. Let me see. A lot of stuff just came through the chat. I think people are sharing resources.
Awesome.
Yeah, can you speak a little bit about, Kathy mentioned that looking at Fab Labs in schools, sometimes the programming in the Fab Lab is geared more towards the smarter kids or the gifted students. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So unfortunately, we've observed this. We actively work locally against it. So the way this has worked in our community, just a little bit of context, we have 80 schools in our school system, serving about 45,000 students. Starting in 2017, we put out a call for proposals. Principals and teachers and school leadership teams had to submit a proposal. It ended up being about a 4-page proposal as they answered like essay questions. Getting a lot of like why they wanted to have a lab, how they were going to implement the lab, how they would support the teacher, and specifically how they would schedule for the lab. We weren't looking for schools that had demonstrated proficiency from a technical standpoint. We were looking for a specific kind of mindset and strong rationale. Most of the schools that didn't get one, like in their first attempt that applied and weren't awarded a lab, it was almost, not always, but many times, because they identified their scheduling mechanism was sort of to what Kathy's getting at. They would say, once kids have reached a certain level of math proficiency, then they're rewarded by getting to go to the lab. We just don't see using digital fabrication as an incentive or a dessert. It feels antithetical to where how Fab Labs started and what they do around the world outside of education. And it obviously creates a significant equity issue. Instead, we stumbled into Fab Labs for school as a specific solution to a specific problem. We were recognizing our kids didn't get to work through ideation. They didn't get to try to bring their ideas to life. And doing so, we're missing out on some of the incidental and deep learning moments that happen when you work through that process. So we didn't set out to open Fab Labs in schools. We set out to empower kids to have that kind of deeper learning. And Fab Labs happened to be the mechanism we sort of stumbled into. So when schools start trying to get shiny new stuff, they oftentimes set it aside for their shiny kids. And we really think fundamentally it has the power to transform how kids learn, period. If that's true, it absolutely, this is a core value, should not be reserved for certain kids.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much, Michael. Applause all around.
Great, thank y'all. I can't wait to dig through the chat. So much
yeah, I was gonna say,
value in there. That's awesome.
There will be some scrolling happening next, but we really appreciate your talk and sharing with us. Such good insight and a lot of things are cooking, and a lot of people are giving you thanks and claps in the chat. So great, awesome.